Hey guys, on this episode, we're going to be talking about the linebackers, safeties, and cornerbacks, who we think are our top five. Got a lot of interesting players, some overlap at the top, but it's really interesting because this is one of the deeper positions that we talked about in each group. So stay tuned, relax, and enjoy the show.
Hello, hello. Welcome everybody to another episode of the podcast. This is episode 22. I see Korshan frantically waving his hands and greeting. I wish you all the same. Hope you're doing well. Today's all defensive talk. We've been talking about like the offenses and the lines in previous episodes. So we wanted to preview who are our best linebackers, cornerbacks, and finally safeties. As far as like the linebackers, we really tried to cover guys who are more off ball because the way the league is played now is a lot like basketball in the fact like the edge rushers and pass rushers like 3-4, 4-3 are really like muddied. Is that you can almost just call them edge rushers. So um, it would be really unfair to like put TJ Watt on like the list of um, D lines and linebackers. So we decided let's look at guys who are used as edge rushers and categorize them in those spots. So when we talk about like the off-ball linebackers now, of course, now what comes to mind on like the qualities you look for?
Um, well, I think a big part is being able to lead a defense. Is like more often than not that like off ball or middle linebacker position is seen as kind of just the quarterback of the defense, where they're trying to read the play that the offense might be doing and try to make adjustments so that their defense is ready to make that. And so a big important thing is just having really high football IQ, plus obviously being a solid tackler. Because runs up the middle come your way, you got to be able to move side to side and make those out, stop those outside runs. They break through your defensive line. Plus, you need to be good at pass coverage because again, you are, typically the ones maybe covering those slot players or tight ends or running backs. So it's a really versatile position that demands a lot of different skill sets, which makes this a really difficult thing to rank in my opinion, just because how elite of a because it really is, probably the one of the hardest positions on the defense just because of all the things you have to manage.
Yeah, that last point you mentioned was exactly why I thought it was difficult to rank this list. There are a lot of good linebackers, but I think the elite ones that stand out, you mentioned high football IQ. I go as far as to say, like, combining that with the speed of instincts. Oh, it almost looked like we lost Coach down for a second. He's back now. But um, with that said, you want to make sure like you combine like IQ with fast instincts, so you can react like in plays. And also, I'd add another thing into it. I think the best like linebackers are ones that don't get baited by the quarterbacks. Where a lot of like quarterback throws, like probably like 60 to 70% of the league quarterbacks, always like to draw the defense with their eyes and then kind of like shift gears to like a secondary or tertiary receiving option in the passing game because they manage to manipulate the linebackers and the safeties by extension. So you'll hear this when we talk about the cornerbacks and the safeties, but the good linebackers like understand their coverage responsibilities and the holes within their coverage responsibilities because cover two, cover three, man to man coverage always have these weaknesses. So I'll add a fourth one in there. My criteria probably linebackers that can match up against running backs and like slot receivers or like quicker receivers, um, based on stereotypical build. Because a lot of offenses like scheme for a matchup on the linebacker, and what that like what that implicates is that the linebacker won't be able to cover those receiving options. So having guys that can offset that stereotype and really cover those um, running backs and like slot receivers that are like mad quick is probably like a rare skill set that teams covet. So I look at those guys, and that's what made up my list.
Mhm.
With that said, who do you got at five?
For my number five off-ball linebacker, I picked Shaquille Leonard. You know, this last season, I believe he had injuries and whatnot that kind of played into, I guess, him not being a mainstream name. I talked about last season, but I think that obviously him being healthy again is we're gonna kind of see what he's been doing and how good he is as a linebacker. And we kind of just saw the fact that literally from the beginning, the starting of his career, he's shown that he's had elite off-ball capabilities. There's a reason why him and Roquan are the top two highest paid off-ball linebackers in the NFL right now, and he does well. He's a phenomenal run stopper, which I really like, especially because when you look at the Colts division, it boasts a handful of really talented runners, and so just having that ability to, I guess, creating that almost as a strength of his, I think is a really good just attribute to have in terms of his playmaking ability. But in addition to that, he's just a really smart player. And maybe like I don't know if his rookie season he was really thrust into the leadership role, but he obviously kind of grew into that. And the fact that he has such a high NFL linebacker IQ at such a young age, and the fact that it'll probably just continue to get better from here on out, whether him having a few down seasons, but overall, I think he is the number 5 off-ball linebacker in the league.
No, that's a great pick. I didn't have him in my top 5, but I fully understand why you did. It might be the injury last year, to be honest, on why I didn't have him in my top 5. But I look at Shaq Leonard, and I just love his energy. I love his energy as a linebacker. He carries that swagger and confidence, and especially on that spot, when we just discussed this being the hardest position in the NFL, you need to have that. He was the best linebacker on that Colts team, and they're gonna really like they missed him last year. They're really gonna do well with him in that fold this year. I think it's gonna make a huge difference for that team. I went with Levante David. I think despite this team winning the championship a couple years back, he's still slept on as one of like the top linebackers in the NFL. And I think a large reason why is because of how Tampa struggled last year as like an overall defensive unit. They were missing a lot of guys in the secondary. Um, Devin White didn't have his finest season. A lot of people used his aggressiveness against him, and I think a lot of people didn't pay attention to what Levante could do. He still posted like top 5 positional values in like coverage and overall grade per PFF. So when I look at that and saying he's still like a strength where you need him in like the passing game, like on the defensive side of the ball, and he can match up against tight ends and running backs as a linebacker. So I have him at 5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's a really talented player. I have him ranked a little bit differently than you do, but again, top 5 in a position is top 5 regardless of where you put them in the top 5, and so I think that's a good choice to have. I think there's few linebackers that do what he does, especially for how long he's done it as well. But I talked about my number 4 guy just a second ago, but it is Roquan Smith, the linebacker for the Baltimore Ravens. Let's see, like I guess he was technically having slightly down, like a down time playing with the Bears, but we see that like the second he got with the Ravens, unfortunate to your Chicago Bears, Josh, he really picked it up. He had a really, really great season with them. I think this last season he had a career, 2022 season. He had 169 total tackles, 11 tackles for a loss, 4.5 sacks, and 3 interceptions. And I think like, what more can you ask from a linebacker than to put up these kinds of numbers? Plus, this defense already had lots of talent, and he was just able to kind of emerge out of that as well and just showcase that he is the best player on that defense, despite having all this talent around him. Additionally, he has incredible speed. He can cover, any slot guy, any tight end, just going across the middle of the field. And I think that really adds on to just the stats that he put up this last season. And again, looking at those tackles for loss, his division also boasts a couple really good runners as well. You're looking at Najee Harris, who's one of the few 3-down bruiser backs in the league. You got Nick Chubb there. And then you got Joe Mixon there. Who, like all three of those guys are three down type backs, and just his ability to make those tackles for the loss, he can get behind the offensive line pretty well and just be a surefire tackler. I think is huge for this Ravens team that's trying to contend for the playoffs and go deep in it.
Yeah, and I've had him differently ranked than you do, so I've actually have him higher on my list.
Mm-hmm.
And you brought up a lot of great points on why. I think in the Bears situation, it seemed like he had a down like first half of the season because of the pass rush. It was literally like subpar to like the league average pass rushing units on the D line. So that played a large role where he's just strictly in coverage and he wasn't allowed to showcase all of his abilities, and sometimes he would blitz more than intended, so he would kind of like give away certain looks where Roquan couldn't be at himself because there were natural like schematic coverages that were easy to identify on the offensive end. So now on the Ravens, it's a little bit different because you got talent all around. You can miss and match who you blitz. They always love running exotic blitzes and exotic coverages. And that allows like Roquan to just react with instincts. And when he does that, he's one of the best linebackers in the NFL. I agree with you. Solid selection, deservedly belongs in the top five. I went a little bit different. I went to Mario Davis.
Mm-hmm.
He's another guy like Levante David in the NFC South, where I just feel like he's not talked about enough because he's just so consistent as a tackler. And I think um, when you look at his grade, um, like it was the second highest of his career for PFF. But I think the number one quality that he has in common with my number five pick, but just like better skill set, I feel like, is great awareness and playmaking and coverage. And I think his ability to anticipate the run and the passes is slightly better than Levante David just because like
Mm-hmm.
Mario Davis can shut down the run like inside or outside zone
Mm-hmm.
in a heartbeat. And I think when that's why he's one of the reasons why the New Orleans Saints defense is a defense to be feared going into the season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like that pick. I also have Demario Davis in my top five linebackers, and you can see there's a little bit of crossover here, but my number three guy also happens to be Demario Davis. Davis, he continuously, despite his age, continues to put up really good stats from the inside linebacker position, and has really, helped be a staple of. It's the Saints that he's on now, right? Yeah, it's the Saints.
Yeah, it's on the Saints still. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, he's been a staple for the Saints for forever, basically. I mean, that's how it feels. He's like ancient nowadays, but despite his age, he continues having 100+ tackle seasons. He's getting 10 tackles, or he has, I think, for the past couple of years, he's gotten at least 10 tackles for a loss, which is another, phenomenal stat to have. So he has shown that, he's a sure tackler for one. He can be a game wrecker in the backfield. Just, stopping the run, getting those important key tackles that ends up leading to those punts and, getting their offense back on the field. In addition to that, he's just a really smart, high IQ player. And I think we've just seen that over the course of the past couple of years that we've seen him put up these elite numbers. Um, that he knows how to play football. He's really smart. He knows how to command a defense, and just kind of all those metrics lead me to think that he is number three on this list. I mean, three and four, between the two of us, really isn't that much of a jump or anything. And so I think just anything you said as well about him kind of just showcases how good he is, and the fact that we both have him in our top five, I think, just showcases that he really is that guy for the Saints. And um, the Saints, I think a big reason why the Saints are considered contenders um, is the fact that they have such a solid defense being led by Demario Davis.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not going to go too much into Roquan Smith too, but you brought up a lot of great points with him, and we just went into that discussion. I think
Mm-hmm.
he's one of the reasons why Baltimore has a really good shot to win the AFC North. I think in our schedule, we both had Cincinnati winning that division, but
Mm-hmm.
Baltimore could equally win that as well because Roquan Smith is such a difference maker, plus with the playmakers they have on defense.
Mm-hmm.
I think he makes that big of a difference compared to Cincinnati. Although Cincinnati has a pair of like solid linebackers in their own right who shouldn't be underestimated. I think Roquan
Mhm.
Smith is one of the best in the level. There's like levels to these linebackers. So I think he's going to be huge when he's like tasked with covering guys like Tyler Boyd, like Smith, who's like a fourth option, but who's a beast when he's healthy. And then the guys they have in Cleveland and stopping Nick Chubb and like stopping um, all those wide receivers they have. And like this is the one guy you want on the defense in the pass happy guy, in the pass happy league. So,
Mhm.
Broke at number three. You touched upon a lot of good reasons why. We'll proceed with your number two guy.
Yeah, my number two guy. um, Talked about him earlier, Levante David. Again, I don't think I have all too much to add on to it. Obviously, he's a phenomenal player. I guess like a big thing with Levante David is that he's been elite in pass coverage for what like I'm looking right here. It's like 6 straight seasons where his overall grades and coverage grades are above 70, and so and he's coming off one of his best seasons yet in terms of coverage, and so I think that just speaks in itself of how great of a player he is, and like I feel like I don't know, it always feels like the next year he's about to fall off just because of how old he is, and you're like he can't sustain this elite level of play for this not long. But yeah, I feel like each year he comes back and surprises me, and like what they brought in Devin White, right, like a couple of years ago, and I'm like, oh, I guess this is the transition of phasing out Levante David from being the main guy in that defense, but um, he's still there. He's still kicking. He's really good. He's still significantly better than Devin White, in my opinion, just in terms of, I guess, overall linebacker playmaking ability. And so I think just again with his experience, I think experience is a big part of this, and that's why I had Demario Davis at my number three, followed with Levante David as my number two spot. And so I think that I guess together had me ranking Levante David at my number two spot.
Yeah. Um, and all the guys you mentioned before, they're equally on par with this guy, but there's no stats that I think quantify how valuable Matt Milano is to the Buffalo Bills, and that's why I have him number two. I think every time I watch him play on the Bills, I always think he's like the best player on the team despite all the behemoths they have on their team, even adding Von Miller, because I just think he's that special of a linebacker. I just look at him in pass coverage. He's unbelievably quick, has great instincts. We talked about it in the beginning. He always seems to understand what the opposing quarterback's trying to do. So he always won't get the interceptions. And despite that, he tied for the lead in interceptions with Roquan at three. And despite that, he's a really sound tackler in space. And I think in the space game in this NFL league, like a lot of these linebackers on the list, like I could probably name like two that I could confidently think they can tackle in space along with Matt Milano. Not including our number one guy we have in Boquan and Demario Davis.
Mm-hmm.
But this guy always seems to like not allow any yards after the catch and
Mm-hmm.
yards after like contact. Really sound tackler, really good in coverage, like graded out coverage better. And in fact,
Mm-hmm.
like the tandem between him and Tremaine Edmonds was sixth in the league last year. So I think it kind of underscores the importance he has. And Buffalo made it a priority to keep him and not Tremaine Edmonds and trust the third round rookie because of the leadership this guy brings. I think he's
Mm-hmm.
the heart and soul of this Buffalo defense. And I would be surprised if he's not top five by the end of the season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Matt Milano. He's a guy that I think fell out of my top five ranking. I think he's right there with Shaquille Leonard for me, and there's a couple like one or two other guys I think on the tip of my tongue that I'm forgetting as well that I think we're really close to making this top five list for me, but obviously it's the moment of truth. The top linebacker, in our opinions, we happen to share the same opinion on this one, so I'm announcing it this way. But it is the man, the myth, the legend, Fred Warner. Bet you thought I was going to say someone really bad for a second there, but no. I wasn't going to bait you this time, but yes, we think that it's Fred Warner. I think pretty undisputed amongst most NFL fans that Fred Warner is the best current, off-ball linebacker in the league right now. I mean, he tackles a bunch. I think he had over 120, 130-ish tackles last season. He had sacks. He had a good amount of quarterback pressures, tackles for loss, run stops. He had literally everything you ask for in terms of playmaking ability. But on top of that, he is just, again, high football IQ type player that he passes the eye test when you see him on the field as well. And so it's not like he's not the type of guy to like pad his stats or cherry pick random metrics, I guess, that you can be good at linebacker for. But he really showcases that, on the field, that he knows what's going on, and that's why he's able to get in the right places at the right time and be a key difference maker. Because again, I think the 49ers have one of the best defenses in the NFL, but I think that it's really held together by Fred Warner, because I think if they had a weaker, I mean, even if it was just Dre Greenlaw right there, I think that Dre Greenlaw is a really good linebacker, but I think that we could see quite a step down in terms of overall defensive play if we replaced Fred Warner's, got rid of him and had Dre Greenlaw fill in his spot.
No, absolutely fair. And that's why I also have Fred Warner number one. And I just think I don't think we even need to put stats on it. He had like 99 total tackles actually, and one forced fumble and 35 assists. That might have been the number you were looking for when you said he had over 100 tackles. The stats get kind of weird when it's like gang tackling in the NFL. But when I just watch Fred Warner play, he's like Matt Milano, except he's a missile. And that's hard to say because like Matt Milano is a missile himself, but like that's just the speed that Fred Warner plays out on everything. Like he's violent on the closeouts, like in pass coverage. He always like knows how to explosively shut down like gaps. I think if you think about some of the Chargers linebackers and like Arizona Cardinals, like those are like projects, like athletic projects that they have that haven't panned out exactly the way like people want like Fred Warner out of it. And I think Warner's just like he's the captain of that defense. He makes all systems go. He allows like the pass rush and the coverage to marriage all the time, and he covers the gaps in each coverage that there is. So I think there's no other guy to put up there at number one except that one.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
Covered it
So
all.
that marks our top five linebackers. Guys that come to mind for me that just missed the cut. Probably Bobby Wagner, still at this old age. You mentioned Dre Greenlaw. Tremaine Edwards really made that top six defense in Buffalo as well. I don't think you can forget about a lot of guys, maybe like David Long Jr., Devondre Campbell, Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah. There's a lot of linebackers that are really good. Even Aluakun out of Jacksonville. They're all coming up there. So this list can very well change within the next couple years. Alrighty. So now it's time for one of our favorite positions in this pass happy league. You always got to have your shutdown corners. So it'll be interesting to talk about how we rank this five. It's always a debate when you've seen like YouTube thumbnails on who's top five or Bleacher Report who has their top five cornerbacks. So I'm really excited to talk about this group. Who are you looking for as like far as like the best cornerbacks in the league?
Yeah. I think this isn't, I guess, easier one in terms of just like looking at the metrics that are out there for like, I guess, cornerback play in terms of, what passer rating do they give up and how well do they do in like man coverage, zone coverage, catch rate, how much are they shadowing the top target on opposing teams. And so I think, I don't know, it's just kind of a mix of that. Plus, I mean, like when you watch them, is it like, are they cherry picking almost like again, like, a player that doesn't shadow nearly as often, but has like the good stats. It's like, is that the guy I want to rank higher, or is it the guy that may put up worse stats, but has that higher shadowing rate? And it's kind of determining when to pick those stats and when to pick the other ones, because obviously, especially like you said, with the pass happy league, most teams don't have just one superstar receiver these days. A lot of teams, it's a duo or even a trio for a couple teams that it comes down to guarding. And so even if you're not shadowing the number one guy, the number two guy typically could be a superstar regardless.
Yeah, and I just think about what the Cowboys did with adding Stephon Gilmore in the offseason. I don't think we had him in our top five in any of these cases, but you need that secondary cornerback with the way the league just wants to avoid that top cornerback and the number of ways you can do that. I'd add another component into it. I think stopping the run is also crucial because the
Hmm.
way the league is going right now with like gap scheme on like toss plays, or
Hmm.
even if you're still with a zone running. Most of these runs are designed to get to the perimeter because of the perceived weakness that cornerbacks don't want to tackle, or like nickels don't want to tackle because they don't have the body for it, or they don't have the physicality to exert on that like every down basis. And it's even turned into the screen game or to like the run pass option schemes. So I think cornerbacks that can do that as well as a very high effective rate also factored into my list, but it's a lot of like the coverage ability
Hmm.
because the way receivers can win in so many different ways. Like sometimes it doesn't even matter how good you are; it's just the receiver's better and they understand the leverage. And if they have that um, chemistry with their quarterback, there's really nothing you could do schematically to stop them. So I also look at the cornerbacks who transcend that scheme and can win in man-to-man coverage. I also highly value that in my
Hmm.
backup. So who do you got at five? I'm really curious to see because I had him differently in my list.
Yeah. So for my number five guy, I had Sauce Gardner, and I know a lot of lists these days have him at the number one spot, and I think that like honestly, I mean he's a good cornerback, and honestly, I feel like I'm even trying to save face by keeping him in the top five. I think I could honestly put him a bit lower. I mean, one, I like when I watched him. I don't know. I'm bashing him right now because I just don't like him, but he's a phenomenal player. I mean, like he puts up, against. Okay, for the positives first. Um, he is elite in. I think he was one of the league leaders in pass breakups. He was a league leader in touchdowns allowed. He was one of the top players in yards per target allowed at 5.5, I think, per target. And so, he puts up these um, insanely elite numbers. But I think, like, when I watch him play, I feel like if his name wasn't Sauce Gardner, I feel like we've all seen it where we feel like he probably would have been called for a couple more penalties. Where he feels like a really handsy cornerback, which I mean it works when I mean everyone does it to a certain extent, but I feel like I saw it a lot with him. But additionally, I feel like in terms of the cornerback room, there's a lot of times where a phenomenal year one cornerback has a sophomore slump, and that's kind of where we see how the cornerback does their second season. So I think the year 2 and 3 for cornerback is really important. Also, another thing that I saw with him is I think he had a somewhat lower shadow rate on terms of guarding the number one cornerback, and so I think if that would have been higher, closer to 50%, I believe from the stats that I looked at, he was guarding the number one guy about 36% of the time. But I'd like to see that closer to 50 in order to have me probably say that he is the best cornerback in the league. And so like I bashed him a lot here, but I still think that I mean he sticks to wide receivers like glue, despite what he may or may not be holding at times. But um, I think that even if he doesn't hold, he's still an elite cornerback, and I think that we should hopefully see more of that from him. But overall, that's my opinion on Sauce Gardner here.
Yeah, and honestly, I didn't rank him too far than what you did. I don't see him as a number one cornerback just because he just came into the league, and there's a lot of game film he showed that receivers can build off of. And yeah, I'd admit I saw a couple holding calls that were missed, but I think there's like a slight difference from when you're as a fan when you're watching
Mm-hmm.
football, but between like holding and then like maintaining the amount of space you're allotted
Mm-hmm.
um, as a cornerback. I think oftentimes it's okay if you are a little bit handsy, but if you're like pushing off with your full like elbow extended, then that's like, oh, you're clearly interfering with the route, or like you're clearly impeding on the space that the receiver has available to him to used to catch the ball. So there's a lot of nuances to it, but at the same time, I think the reason why I had Sauce Gardner lower than a lot of pundits did as well is because I hadn't seen him that well shutting down the run, and I want to see that out of him, like in his growth rate, so he can be like a well-rounded cornerback, and he's not going to be like targeted on those plays because I'm sure as heck that people don't want to run up the middle against Quinton Williams and that scary front seven. So I know for a fact they're going to be targeting either Sauce's side or the other side in the run game. So um, I don't mind you having him at 5. Again, he's a rookie and he's already on the top 5 list of corners. I think that's pretty impressive feat. We'll see if he sticks up there in the next couple of years of his career. At 5, I had Darius Slay. Part of it was not his fault. Like James Bradbury came in like in this season, so there's a little bit that goes into that because when you look at his effectiveness, it got enhanced. He only allowed like 54.7 passes to be thrown his way in the regular season, and he didn't allow more than like he allowed less than 25 yards in all of his 3 playoff games. But if I look at the Eagles defense in total, like you can get Darius Slay on a couple plays, and I don't think he was the same player as he was on the Lions. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it remains to be seen how he will do like this upcoming season, but I want to see more out of him. So this is more like he's regressing from like a higher spot than where would he be normally
Mm-hmm.
located.
Yeah. Now with Darius Slay, I contemplated putting him in around this range probably. In my opinion, I feel like my cornerback ranked 4 through maybe even 9 or 10 um, is quite interchangeable. I think that I could really put any of the quarterbacks, like my cornerback 10 at my number 5 spot, and I think that it would have been it would have been a perfectly valid argument to have him in that position. But so because of that, uh, I kind of had a little bit more fun with some of these rankings. But my number 4 cornerback, I had the Seattle Seahawks rookie Tariq Woolen here. Um, and I feel like at least when I see the rankings, they toss around Sauce Gardner like all the time and completely ignore Tariq Woolen, despite them having near identical like levels of production. I think that Tariq Woolen was just slightly better than Sauce Gardner. um, and I have some stats to talk about that later, but I think yeah, Tariq Woolen he is often forgotten about, and I think that I mean I even look at the I guess the differences between the two defenses, and I think that the Jets number 1 had a better defense than the Seahawks did, and the fact that Tariq Woolen's able to showcase slightly more or even the same amount as Sauce Gardner in a slightly worse defense. I don't know how I rank these two defenses off the top of my head, but I do know for a fact that I have the Jets higher. Anyways, the fact that Tariq Woolen is able to showcase his, I guess, elite playmaking ability here, had me put him at the number 4. Again, I could have him anywhere from 4 to like 9 or 10. But what I did like is he had around that 50% shadow rate that I really wanted to see, and like even that's not necessarily the highest, but it's again, I thought it was significantly higher than Sauce Gardner, and he had one of the best. Tariq Woolen had one of the best target rates in the NFL, which I thought was pretty impressive. I don't know. I saw that. I'm like, hey, I didn't even know that, but I saw that and I was like, it's pretty good. And I'm just kind of looking at things in general. I mean, comparing Sauce and Tariq because I feel like there's huge. I feel like the next decade potentially could be a debate of who's the better corner from this class. Is it going to be Tariq Woolen or is it going to be Sauce Gardner? And so at least looking at the stats from last season that they put up, um, you know, Tariq Woolen did better in, the, in like targets allowed, the target rates. I think he did better. I think he had more. What here? I got the stats. Yeah, he had a couple more. He has higher on the stats for routes defended, and they were nearly identical for average target distance. And so I think just those numbers kind of spoke to me in terms of having him just slightly above Sauce Gardner. But again, just talking about the or thinking about the last 3 cornerbacks, I think again, these guys could really fall in any order here for me. And what do you have for your number four guy?
Um, I had Sauce,
Hmm.
but even Tariq Woolen I think was a good selection because he had 6 interceptions and
Hmm.
he had a passer rating of like 75.1
Hmm.
when he was targeted, and when you think about like adding a guy like Devon Witherspoon, I think he could even put up better numbers.
Hmm.
I'm talking about Tariq Woolen here, and that's a solid selection. I mean, I think it's a fair assessment of what you made. It's why we do these videos to bring light to more players as well. Um, and I think he's also worthy of a top five selection just being a rookie. Both Sauce Gardner and Tariq had equally good seasons. Um, I had him slightly outside my top five. To be honest, I probably put him in like 7 or 8, um, probably, but still not a bad selection to have him this high up this early in his career
Hmm.
is pretty impressive. As for Sauce, I wanted to throw up some more stats. The things he does well is he allowed only 53.9 passer rating, and 49.9% of his passes were caught by the intended receiver. So I think while there's chance for regression, I think Gardner like already being like one of the best at like coverage play is really important. Um, the reason why I don't have him higher on this list is I like to see him like Darius Slade be involved in the run game a little bit more and shutting that down before I'm willing to put him in the top three. But he had a top three worthy season as far as pass coverage allows, so that's the reason why he's number four for me.
Hmm. Yeah. Looking at my list now, I kind of want to change my number three and number two, just like looking at it. But I mean, I can stick with what I got for now. But just for anybody listening, I don't know. I feel like I'd want to switch mine. Anyways, my number three guy though that I listed earlier was Jalen Ramsey. I feel like it's not a top cornerbacks list without having Jalen Ramsey in the list, right? And so, um, I think a big thing with him is the fact that he is really versatile in terms of fitting into multiple schemes. I think I mean, what this is his third team, and he started with Jacksonville, then he went to the Rams, and now he's with the Dolphins. And I'm assuming he's going to do well. He's back with Vic Fangio with the Miami Dolphins this year, and so I think we'll see kind of a rebound in terms of what he did last season, because I know last season was a down year, and the fact that what he did last year was considered a bad year for him, I think speaks just the tremendous talent that this player has. But yeah, the fact that I think he's just might be the most versatile corner in terms of being able to adjust to different schemes. And I think just that ability alone has me put him at the has I think puts you at like a top 15 cornerback at bare minimum. But then just to be able to excel at all these different schemes that he's in kind of cements him in my top five, where I put him at my number three spot. And I feel like again last season is kind of a hard season to grade him at, just because again it was a down year for him. But I think that he has just a bounce back, especially considering the fact that how bad the Rams defense was last year. I mean, you look at the defense; it was quite literally the Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey show last season for them. And now you go to a team that actually has talent all over, and so I think we'll see him really dominate the league. And I think you mentioned this earlier in terms of your ranking system, but he's a really physical player. He's not afraid to tackle, and I think that because of just the things that I said right here would have me have him at like the number two, maybe even the number one spot for me. But when I was looking at him earlier, I was like, let's be quirky and put him at number three. But anyways, that's what I have on Jalen Ramsey.
And this, my friends, is why you try not to think outside the box and have your own opinions and whatnot. But all joking aside, hey, um, this is why we have this because like we're probably bringing like honest opinions on this and like real time thoughts on players like that. So I think who you had at 3, 2, and 1 is a fair assessment of the players themselves.
Hmm.
I know you're going to be talking about them later, so I'll talk about my number three cornerback, which is Jair Alexander. Um, Honestly, he'd probably be higher on my list as well, if not for the injury last season. But even so, still believe he's a top three cornerback because if you look at his stats, he set a career high in interceptions. At 26 years old, just allowing a 66.2 passer rating when targeted and averaging an above 80 coverage grade in PFF. That speaks volumes to me. He's a shutdown corner. There's times where he's got by a couple like receivers, especially one on the Bears. That was glorious to see. But all joking aside, I think he's not talked about despite being like one of the top cornerbacks in the NFL. He's not talked about nearly enough as like a Darrell Revis or like a prime Jalen Ramsey type. Like he's one of those cornerbacks. I feel like so. Um, I thought it'd only be fair to have him in the top three because all I hear is literally Sauce Gardner, and that's like he should be a top one quarterback. But honestly, I think Jerry Alexander's putting just as impressive stats on the field, has more experience, has more responsibilities, knows more as a veteran. And I think all of that being said, I think he's higher for now on my list.
Hmm. Yeah, all good points. I was looking at some of those stats as well, and I'm like, yep. I mean, there's a reason why he's so good, and that's why I have him at my number two spot. Um, yeah, I think a big part of what I liked from him was I feel like he's surpassed his slump years almost, if that makes sense. Because I feel like when I think about his, I guess, era of cornerbacks, like I don't know, the drafts maybe a year before, 2 years before ish, where I think of, Tre'Davious White, Marlon Humphreys, Marshawn Lattimore, Denzel Ward. I think they all started out a lot better than Jair Alexander did coming into the league.
I agree.
But we've seen all four of those guys kind of go up and down in terms of just their cornerback ability. Whereas with Jair Alexander, I have him just, it seems like every year he either does just as good or better than he did the previous years. And I think that's what cements him at my number two spot. And I think that plus, I guess, him being just a bit younger than Jalen Ramsey had me initially put him here at my number two spot, which, I mean, again, I feel like my top three are quite interchangeable. And that's why I probably said my number three could have been my number two. And that's why I said Jalen Ramsey could also be my number one guy here. But yeah, I think Jair Alexander, he's proven that he isn't just, like that one season wonder in terms of super high elite levels of play and then kind of just falling back into maybe the rankings that I had for the other guys, which should have been that 4 through 9 type ranking, where I mentioned earlier that my 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 could be quite interchanged.
Yeah, and I love how you brought up people in this draft class as comparisons for like player development because I think a lot of times like as fans and like even as organizations, like they want a player to be good right away. Like I don't think Sauce Gardner or Tariq Woolen's happen like all the time. It's not
Mm-hmm.
common. It's very rare that that happens. But on top of that, like players can improve from year to year based on experience and what they know and what they did know coming into the league. And I think Jair Alexander is one of those players where um, he earned the right to be a top three cornerback at this stage of his career. I think one guy who has already got that, granted that his dad was in the NFL, so he learned a lot from it. But again, not one of those cornerbacks who's not talked about enough, but I feel is equally, if not better, than Sauce Gardner is Patrick Surtain II. Um, I know you have him also on your list, um, but I'm gonna talk about like how he doesn't look as flashy, but he has the same effectiveness, more consistency. He had 12 games, allowing fewer than 25 receiving yards, and this included 6 straight outings to end the season at that stat. And his coverage grade improved by over 20 points in PFF coverage, and that's huge to me. And every time I watch him play, I don't think he's a liability against the run. I think he can stop the run just fine. He's physical. That's how he wins. He anticipates what quarterbacks are trying to do conceptual wise, and that's why he's in my top two compared to the other guys. I think my top two guys understand what opposing offenses are doing conceptually, and that's what separates them above the rest.
Yeah. Agree with everything you said. PS2 is a beast, and that's why I have PS2 as my number one cornerback. Definitely zero. Oops, I click it. Anyway, um, yeah. Obviously, I'm a Broncos fan. I love him anyways, but yeah, genuinely, I do think he is the best cornerback in the league. Again, though, it is quite interchangeable with this top three in my opinion. But I do like um, the fact that after what I thought was already a really good rookie year, like after his rookie year, I'm like, oh wow, like this guy is is a top tier cornerback, and then his sophomore year, he just goes and builds upon that season. Really, I guess, did it for me in terms of having him as my number one cornerback. And again, I look at some of the competition, or not competition, but I guess the wide receivers that he went against, and the fact that he's shutting down, the likes of Devonte Adams, causing pass breakups for arguably one of the best receivers in the league for the past 5 years or so, I think is quite tremendous. And feel like everybody, this was a really big test year for him, I think, just in terms of talent that he was facing and the fact that he really rose to the occasion, especially with just Broncos had a bunch of injuries, and it was pretty easy to call it a lost season for the Broncos. I think just with how awful they were playing. But regardless, the defense for the Broncos really stayed, as a big, I don't know, focal point for this team that people were still able to talk about just because of how talented Pat Surtain, amongst a few other superstars on this defense, were able to make it for them.
All good points. Um, I don't have a number one. It's not his fault. I think we've seen more from Jalen Ramsey and how he's been used in coverages, and that's a credit to what Brandon Staley has done with him moving into the star position. Ever since this happened, I think we've seen what an all-around cornerback Jalen Ramsey can be, while still being one of the top coverage guys in the NFL. And I think it's shown by having multiple defenses and distinct roles and still having outstanding seasons makes him a positionless quarterback, and he is the best run defender in the league. And on top of being a good pass coverage, I have to put him number one. And with Brandon Staley and Vic Fangio running similar schemes, because um, Staley was the linebackers coach when Fangio was the defensive coordinator on the Bears during that Herald season where we looked like we were going to go to the Super Bowl because of our defense. But still, going into that scheme, he's going to be huge for them late in December and January. It's a shame he got hurt, but I think at the end of the season, I still think Miami's going to make the playoffs despite losing him. Um, I think you're really going to see what an impact he's going to have on that team compared to how they started out because um, he could do it all. He could do it all. Like the star position is basically like a glorified slot that can rush the passer and stop the run, like get in the mix. Like he is that safety in the box, and that allows it to still keep too high and stop the run. Um, so like the multiple ways you could use him in the run and pass game as a defensive coordinator is boundless, and you can't scheme away from him because of all the places you can line up on the field. So have to go with him at number one.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I think. I mean, I keep on saying it, but yeah, like my top three guys are quite interchangeable. Like the second I talked about Jalen Ramsey, I already backtracked and said he's probably my number two guy. But then, as I talked about Jair Alexander, I'm like, it's kind of valid. I have him at my number two spot, and then I don't know. So yeah, but I mean, and I guess in terms of honorable mentions, I mean, I mentioned a bunch of guys just a second ago that were, that Jair Alexander, like God class basically with, guys like Denzel Ward, uh, Tre'Davious White, Marlon Humphrey, Marshawn Lattimore. Just, I mean, that period of cornerbacks I think is pretty crazy to have. Just the fact that in such a short time, so many elite cornerbacks came into the league, and now the fact that there's so many elite cornerbacks that those guys have already fallen out of like top five contention, at least in terms of our list, which is kind of crazy. But that's kind of all I have for the cornerbacks.
I'll add two more guys. I think Trayvon Diggs, despite him like being up and down, like his highs are really high as far as interceptions, and I think it became a better overall player last year than he was the year before that. And I would also not forget about J.C. Horn out of Carolina.
Hmm.
Um, like out of like the 2 years he's played less than 1,000 snaps, but he's allowed just one touchdown and
Hmm.
318 yards total, and he's given up a 48.1 passer rating so far when he's targeted, which is insane. And I just think like we don't talk about him enough because of the state of Carolina's roster still being in the rebuild phase.
Hmm.
But I would not be surprised if he just suddenly like makes it known like that he's in the top 5 or top 10 where that matter. He's already there in the top 10 in my mind. But keep an eye on JC Horn. He's another lockdown corner that doesn't get enough public recognition.
Hmm. Yeah. Ugh.
Yeah, so that's probably it's always controversial to do a cornerbacks list.
Hmm.
I think safeties are probably it was probably harder to come up with a safeties list to be honest because there's so many
Yeah.
good ones. There's a lot of safeties that play in different defined roles. So like our lists are widely different. That's probably based on our preferences. But with that said, what were you looking for when you made your safeties list and your top 5?
Um, like you said, different like there's a lot of different roles that safeties encompass in today's NFL, especially because I mean we're also talking about free safeties and strong safeties, and I mean their roles are similar but also different at the same time. Plus, you have the coverage safeties, you have and within that you got have guys that are elite like man coverage type safeties, like like Tyrann Mathieu. I'd say he's one of the better man to man type safeties. But then you also have the elite zone coverage safeties, elite uh interception specialists. Plus you have all the box safeties. The guys that are elite stopping the run. And so I think this is honestly just a preference list for me. I think in terms of guys that I really liked and I thought were the best at what they do, despite maybe having different roles just because again there are so many roles that it's hard to say these specific things are the reasons why I rank this safety higher than the other just because um again the roles are so different despite being the safety position.
Yeah, I also found myself like tugging and like trying to see like um because I disagree with a lot of PFF's rankings based on how I've seen these safeties used like from college and then like how they transitioned that to that in the NFL. And even like you look at guys in my number 4 and number 5 list, and I'm just like they really could be in top 3, honestly, like based on how
Hmm.
their stats padded out. I just like watching the other 3 that are my top 3 that I think can do more and be more effective in multiple things, so they're not perceived weaknesses. Um, so like I almost feel like my top 5 is just like 2 tiers, but like you could put them in any order. So like it was really difficult for me to make this list. But with that said, who do you got at 5?
My number 5 guy was a breakout candidate from this last season that I was really jealous my team didn't have, but it is Talanoa Hufanga. It's just a fun name to say, one, but two, he had a really good season last year. I feel like every time you put on a 49ers game, he was making a play somewhere, right? And I think what helps him, and at least helps him do what he does, is the fact that the 49ers are already, pretty stable and a good defense that, creates those opportunities for his extreme playmaking ability to really, be taken advantage of so that, in terms of standard defense, like, I don't know, a standard defense, I don't think he could necessarily do all the things that he does. I still think that he'd be an elite playmaker, but like I said, with Fred Warner, he is the glue that holds this team together, and it allowed Hufanga to be the guy that he is to showcase that he has this elite level of talent. And I think that there are only a few other safeties in the league that do the type of playmaking that he does. And because of that, I had him in my top 5, despite maybe him not being super high in terms of just standard coverage metrics or just other basic, I guess, PFF type rating systems that might be out there.
And actually, like in the PFF rankings, like he's really good for first year
Hmm.
starter.
Hmm.
Um, he always reminds me of Troy Polamalu.
Hmm.
Just watching him personally, and like the fact he started out on the special teams role in his rookie season and blossomed to have 4 interceptions, 7 pass breakups, 2 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 32 defensive stops. Like he could like he's probably like making a case to be in my top 10 of safeties. Again,
Hmm.
there's a lot of good safeties. I love watching him play. Like he's aggressive. He's not afraid to like just step back and like just prevent the big plays, like willing to go into the action, get it, and I could really respect that. For me, like it's hard to say. I think he's a more well-rounded player on the surface. He just had more experience, I think. I'm gonna go with Kevin Byard. Um, I look at him. I think he's one of the best like pure free safeties in the NFL. Um, he had four more interceptions this year. He makes plays on the ball as a free safety. That's what you want first and foremost. And like he had an above average, let me speak. Above 80 pass coverage grade. There we go. I can speak English. And there we go. And his tackling grade was really good as well. So, like, part of me is like the fact that he's played 1,000 snaps as well has been pretty good as well. Um, but part of me wishes I had him on the higher on this list because, like, I love a lot of the guys above him, but he could easily make the case to be 4 or 5. I mean, 4 or 3, and to have him at 5 feels like the right place to put him in this tier.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, yeah, I agree with everything you said. I had him a little bit higher in my own list. But I really like the things you brought up about him in terms of just his coverage ability, and I think he might be one of the best coverage safeties in the NFL as of now. But for my number 4 spot, I went with Justin Simmons, another Broncos secondary member.
Marco Show.
Yeah, but I do think that the Broncos secondary was easily the highlight portion of that defense. I think that's the reason why the defense is even talked about as a good defense is because of the elite members of the secondary. And I think while I do think that Pat PS2, he's the best secondary member of this team, I do think that Justin Simmons is easily recognized as the captain of this defense, where he kind of is the glue, I guess, that holds this secondary together. And that's kind of one of the things that led me to have him at this number 4 ranking. But also, additionally, he missed a couple weeks this season, but despite that, he was still, tied as the league leader in interceptions. And I think that, a player coming off of an injury, there could be some, you know, off time or I guess getting back into it time, that players may need, especially him being an older player in a difficult position to play. And so I think just all that shows his, I guess, again, high football IQ in terms of being able to make plays like those interceptions despite missing games and just helping, I guess, the Broncos showcase itself as an elite pass coverage unit.
Yeah, he was another guy I was fighting between like Kevin Byard, my number 4 guy, and then him
Hmm.
to be in my top 5. I love Justin Simmons and the way he plays. I think the injury played a factor to why he wasn't on the top 5 in my list right now, but he did lead the league in interceptions. He's had like high end play. He's had 4 games with overall games like below 50, like as far as like coverage allowed. So that's really good. Um, I want to see if he can return to his 2019 performance. If he can, he's easily back in the top 3, top 5 for sure for me. So um, I'm confident he can do it. I just want to see it. I and like I think regardless of whether he's like 80% of that or 70% of that, like he's still a top 10 safety. That's just how good he is.
Hmm.
For me, I went with Tyron Matthew as my top 4 cornerback and top 4 safety rather. He could play nickel as well, but I just love how he's always in the middle of the defense. I think you'll see this as a common thread with the guys I love. You kind of mentioned a lot of things with Hufunga. I think Matthews made his living doing that, honestly.
Hmm.
And his coverage grade led the league, led the league in terms of safeties, and he only gave up 1 reception of 20 or more yards. I think the fact that he's versatile. We talked a lot about like instincts and versatility with Jalen Ramsey. Tyron Matthew has that from the safety position, and I think that's a even now being 30 plus. I think that's huge, and I have to put him top 5 in my list.
Yeah. And like additionally on top of that, I think safeties are a position that age moderately nicely in the NFL. I feel like we've seen I mean, look at Charles Woodson for example. He started out as a corner, but as he got older, he was able to transition to safety. Obviously, he's a Hall of Fame talent, so not every cornerback can do that. But kind of goes to show that the safety position is a little bit more age friendly in terms of you don't need to be an elite, man coverage type player, but as long as you have smart, like high football IQ, like we have Justin Simmons here, we have Tyrann Mathieu here, who are older. Maybe they aren't as good as their physical primes used to be, but because of how smart they are, they're able to retain themselves as top five safeties in the NFL, which leads me to believe that these guys that are in their 30s could continue to be top five, if not top 10 corner or top 10 safeties in the NFL pretty easily.
Right? Okay. Who's your number three?
My number three is a guy you talked about, Kevin Byard. I mean, I agree with basically all the points you mentioned earlier. I think that he is one of the best pure coverage safeties in the NFL. He this is, he's kind of the focal point on his defense in terms of the secondary. That I feel like when you talk about his team, I feel like his name tends to come up. And so I think I don't know. I don't have too much to add. Most of the stuff that you mentioned is stuff that I agree with, but I think that him being already this good, plus just him being a younger player in general, with the I guess room to get even better than what he is right now in terms of I guess football knowledge, kind of had me at this number three spot.
I went with Micah Hyde at three.
Hmm.
Um, this might be a tough one. Like this is what I'm saying when I'm making the safeties list. Like part of me is like I need to see it, but I think with Micah Hyde's case, like it's I want to make an exception to him because I think the year he had in 2021 was absolutely exceptional. He was almost like 90 in terms of coverage grade and 6 interceptions. I think like a neck injury, like forcing him to be out most of 2022, um, like made a lot of people forget just how good he was on the
Hmm.
Bills because like he and Poyer being that tandem is what made that coverage almost like impossible to pass
Hmm.
against. And like he's returning to form now in the Buffalo secondary, so that should be like great to see. I'm so happy for him and DeMar Hamlin for coming back and performing the way they are. They're like one of the most resilient human beings I've seen. But as far as for Hyde, he's always been like a top 10 safety to me. Even his teammate, I can argue, is in the top 10, and Jordan Poyer. But like he just does so many things in the safety spot, whether it's like stopping the run or stopping the pass, and really like limiting big plays from happening. That I still haven't top three, despite him not playing most of 2022.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, he was one of those players that I feel like just bordered this top five list for me. Again, I think that he is one of the best safeties. Obviously, him and Poyer made arguably the best safety duo in the NFL. As for when they've been a tandem together, both playing on the field, and so, um, I mean, I think yeah, he'd probably fit in maybe six or seven on my list, which again isn't anything shabby for a guy who again missed the whole year not due to injury last season. But yeah, I do imagine him reverting back to form. But um, I guess going to my number two guy here, I think my number two and my number one are quite interchangeable. This might be like a 1A, 1B type thing for me, but and I'm assuming you may think the same as well for yours.
Yeah, I do.
But yeah, my number two guy was Derwin James, the safety for the Chargers. I think physically, I guess he might be like one of the best safeties of all time in terms of physicality and just his, I don't know, his like rawness that he has. I don't know, like it almost reminds me of like when Sean Taylor was in the league, where it's like he may not be like the best technically, but like man, when he is on the field, like he is a menace, and like he's a good menace too. Like, and so like I don't know. I feel like when I think of Derwin James, I think of like just all time great type safeties, and that alone helps me put him at the number two. But obviously, he has the stats to back these types of numbers up. He is elite at run. He's an elite run stopper, at least in run defense. He is elite in pass coverage. He's elite in everything that you want from a safety. And I think he's literally Tufanga like on steroids. Like he's like Tufanga. He's everywhere making plays, but like you see Derwin James out here, and he's just that, but like as a beast of a man. And so like I don't even feel like just watch the gameplay like of him playing football, and I think you don't even need to see him put up good stats to know that teams are definitely scheming around Derwin James when they're going to play against him.
I love Derwin James. I have him number one for a reason. I'll wax poetic about him when the time comes. My number two is really a 1B, like you mentioned. It's Minka Fitzpatrick. And I think despite him not having all the physical traits that Derwin James does, he posts better numbers. He had a 82 overall grade, which is really good for a safety. He was third. He was one of just two safeties to post an 82 grade per PFF, and both run defense and coverage, which is why I have him top two. He had league leading 6 interceptions among safeties, and I think with the cornerbacks being in flux, you can like it doesn't matter how many changes Pittsburgh Steelers try to make because their coverage like literally builds off of Minka. Minka's the one calling the shots. He's calling the coverages. Like he'll put his guys in good situations. He's literally a linebacker for the safeties, and from that leadership ability, that just adds to what all he can do. So
Mhm,
I've had him two. I understand why you have him one. Is there
mhm.
anything I touched upon that, or I missed rather, that you think makes Minka above Durbin or like just
Yeah,
slightly above him?
yeah. For me, I think it was like like I know it's been a while since he's been on the Steelers, but just like the complete change the Steelers defense had, like when they acquired him in the first place, it was quite literally night and day with this team. Like his first game with the Steelers, he was the Steelers defense, and I think because they got guys like TJ Watt on the team, it's easy to focus on him and be like, oh, he's the reason why Steelers are so good. I mean, like he is a big part of that as well. But I do think that Minka Fitzpatrick's presence really rebuilt that culture of that defense because I feel like towards the end, or I guess there's been in and out seasons with the Steelers where I feel like their defense was carried a bit by their offense, and I think towards the end of Big Ben's career, um, we kind of started seeing that a weaker defense tied alongside, an aging Ben Roethlisberger, kind of make this a weaker team. But they made that trade for Fitzpatrick, and all of a sudden you're thinking this Steelers team is a contender once again. Defense wins championships, and the second they added Minka Fitzpatrick, this team, as long as they were in the playoffs, became a championship contender. And I think there's just a few safeties, even like in the league that can do this. And I feel like his ability to, I guess, change the team culture. I mean, I've seen it firsthand, I guess, compared to Derwin James, just because Fitzpatrick has changed teams, whereas Derwin James has not. And the fact that we've seen Fitzpatrick do well in two teams as, just a complete game changer, a complete menace as well. But I think that just the complete change that we saw with the Steelers defense, since he's been here, and the fact that the whole time he's been here, like you said, he's put up ridiculously good stats. Kind of speaks to me for him to be my number one safety.
It it reminds me of like one of the rival teams, like best safety in Ed Reed. Like he
Hmm.
reminds me a lot of Ed Reed when I watch him play. His terms is like his instincts and his leadership that he brings to the back end of that defense. And when I watched him, like as soon as he got traded to the Steelers, like you could just see a culture shift, and that is when they had T.J. Watt in the fold, like as well. And I think having T.J. Watt and Minka is going to make this defense like a force to be reckoned with. If there's like a defense that's being slept on this year, pick up the Steelers defense, bet on them because they're going to force a lot of plays because of what they have in the pass rush and the secondary married
Hmm.
together. Um, you touched a lot about Jerry James. And I just can't say enough about the physical traits that he has, but also how well he's used. I think um, in run defense, coverage, and pass rush, he makes him one of the most league like he's the most dynamic player because like he has one of the best grades in all of those. Um, his coverage grade might be just like slightly less than others, but it's like still like startable where you can't pass against him, and you could just intercept it easily. Despite the stats, saying he only has 2 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles, 4 sacks. It's just ridiculous. Like he's another guy like Jalen Ramsey that could be used anywhere on the field, and um, like he's the one guy that out of all these 5 safeties that I think could be a defensive player of the year.
Hmm.
That's how good that I think he is. Like he could even be better than Aaron Donald. And Aaron Donald is a first ballot Hall of Famer. Like out of all the active players on the defense, like you're saying Aaron Donald's going to be that guy. I think Derwin James could in one season have a better season than Aaron Donald,
Hmm.
provided that Aaron Donald doesn't like have a setback. So
Hmm.
like that's just like the talent, the level he can bring to this defense. I talked about the star position and how Jalen Ramsey's used in that scheme, and Brandon Staley runs a variant scheme of Vic Fangio, and Derwin James is that star player. So like, I just think the fact that he could be used anywhere, he can stop the run, stop the pass, rush the passer. I think all of those, like on the safety, like doing much more than what you're tasked with and really transforming the scheme and what offensive playbooks are limited to is the reason why it's number 1 for me.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean I agree with like all that you said right here. That's why I have him as my 1B. I think again, like my top 3 cornerbacks, these top 2 guys are extremely interchangeable in terms of how good of a player they are. I think like a combo of Minka Fitzpatrick and Derwin James would like put the league in shambles just with like how unstoppable that safety duo would be. But um yeah, I don't know. Like, are there any guys I guess that you thought maybe just missed the list for you, or like guys that I guess yeah missed the list.
Um, I would say Jordan Poyer.
Hmm.
If I'm looking at other guys, maybe Antoine Winfield, just because like Tampa had like a setback and then there were injuries on that team. Jesse Bates, even though he just moved
Hmm.
to Atlanta, he's huge on the Bengals. And Javon Holland, like I
Hmm.
think Javon Holland can still have a bounce back season. Um, one guy I'm looking forward to seeing if he could build on his rookie campaign is Kyle Hamilton. So those are just a couple of guys that we keep an eye on that could reach the top
Hmm.
5, definitely reach the top 10 over the next coming seasons.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah I was looking at Javon Holland as well. Yeah, I think yeah he's a focal point for that Miami defense, especially just with how loaded their secondary is now. I think that it'll be just another opportunity to see like what he can do. Plus, I think another player that is forgotten about a lot is Buda Baker. Um,
Right, right. He's also up there too.
yeah, because I feel like I mean he is I guess the focal point for that Cardinals defense nowadays. I feel like I mean they lost what Byron Murphy in the offseason, which I thought he was a pretty solid cornerback. I mean Isaiah Simmons is there. I think he still has room to go in terms of being an elite player, but I think Buda Baker is one of those guys that easily gets forgotten, and I think he'll probably get forgotten this year too, just because you know I don't think the in terms of like Vegas odds or whatever, I don't think the Cardinals are projected to win any games in terms of Vegas betting right now, and so it's when your team sucks, it's easy to forget about the star players there.
And I think one sleeper that I think would should be in the top 10 also that I just glossed over, and it's not Eddie Jackson, even though I have hopes for Eddie Jackson being better
Hmm.
because of better defense. I think it's Kyle Duggar out of New England. I think he's another guy who's like a minor version of Derwin James and how he's used in
Hmm.
New England. And I'm really
Hmm.
excited to see how well he does when they just added Christian Gonzalez out of Oregon this season, who's one of the best cornerbacks out of the draft. I don't know how he slipped to New England,
Hmm.
but watch out for Kyle Duggar. He's going to be an impact player,
Hmm.
especially in that improved Patriots team. Um, with that, that's our positional rankings. we didn't forget about special teams. We just feel like there's so many criteria with special teams and like kickers and punters that are beyond our scope. But stay tuned. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes. You can follow us on the Instagram handle below in the banner. We'll also have it in the show notes for you. Next week, it's kind of a free for all. We're deciding on what we're going to do, but we'll give our preseason takeaways. Lots in store. We'll talk about a bunch of moves that are coming up in the meantime. The Ravens just signed Javion Clowney, so stay tuned to our channel. We'll have a short segment on that. Well, with that, Corsian, do you think I missed anything?
No, I think covered most of it. It's fun talking. Hope you think our ratings and rankings are good. If not, obviously let us know. But I think that's all. Peace.
All right. Peace, guys. We'll see you later.